another edition of Data Privacy and the Law with, of course, my humble self and my very, very good friend and partner, Adedamola. And today I am going to be discussing another thing with you, which is very, very important, and definitely it has to do with your personal data, just in case you are somebody that is seeking to learn how information about you and details about you, generally speaking, how they should be used, how they should be stored, how not to use, and all of that by third parties that have access to all of this information. And of course, just in case you are what we call a data controller or a data processor. Remember, we've had this conversation earlier. So if you are yet to listen to some of those editions, you could just check past video sessions where we discussed a whole lot about all these things. So people or entities that usually would collect personal data or even engage third parties that then process, maybe for some research or for some other use, in the course of which the data, they have access to all of this information. So data really is about information. And remember, something I've always emphasized is the fact that data is the new oil of the economy. And so this is the more reason that you should be excited to have to be a part of our conversation. And just in case you know of people that should also listen to what we are saying on this channel, please reach out to them, tell them to subscribe to this channel, tell them also to be a part of what we are doing every Tuesday, to be a part of it, or even share this video with them so that they can learn. So having said all of this, let's come to what we have to say today. So what are we discussing today? We want to talk about sensitive personal data, what you should know. Sensitive personal data, what you should know. So let's start. What do we mean by sensitive personal data? Well, so something that might come to the mind of many people, because this whole idea around data, data privacy, data protection, they are relatively new, at least within the context of Nigeria, because again, we just released our own data protection law, as it were. But when we talk about sensitive personal data, does this come to mind? Like, my sensitive data would be my code and the 3 code behind and all of that. Now, this is an error many people make. Sensitive personal data would be the data that is more sensitive than the regular information that are known about you. And they are called sensitive personal data not because people will steal your money with them, but they are called sensitive personal data because once people have access to those data, it can be used to discriminate against people. It can also be used to even cause harm to their reputation. So we can also go on to give examples of what we mean by sensitive personal data, and definitely we'll get to that. But let's look at what the law says, Section 31, which is what deals, Section 30, and then you look at Section 31, deals with sensitive personal data. I beg your pardon, Section 30, sub 1, which is what deals with sensitive personal data. And I'm quoting from the Nigeria Data Protection Act 2023. It says a whole lot about sensitive personal data, and it then talks about how not to use and how to use sensitive personal data. And these are things we want to explore in today's conversation. But let's come to the idea of sensitive personal data and what it means. Remember, I started by saying that sensitive personal data is not your ATM card details. No, it's not. They are information about you that are deeper and can be used to discriminate. So you can begin to think of what information about myself can be used to discriminate against me. So let's look at some of this information. I'd like to relate with something that you might be used to. So for instance, I had a reason to do something in one of the EU countries, and I was meant to fill a form, and on that form some of the questions, or one of those questions that came, was a question about my sexual orientation. Am I straight? Am I gay? Am I lesbian? Am I this? Am I that? And let's assume from the context of Nigeria that, so I'm not straight, okay? I'm just saying let's assume, okay? So now that is going to qualify as a very sensitive data about my sexual orientation, especially in a place like the European Union, where the whole idea around gay, lesbianism, and all of these things, where those kind of rights are in existence. But let me not even take you to something that may not be applicable in the context of our own country as Nigeria, especially because of the anti-gay, the law against those things. But let's come to something that may be more applicable. So in the context of Nigeria, let's say that you went online and you filled a form and you were going to be applying for work. And in filling that form, let's say that this happened to be an aviation company that is operated, which has 100% or a majority stake owned by a particular state within the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And then they then asked you to fill what tribe or ethnicity are you from. Now, in filling that information, it might dawn on your mind that that alone might also be used to screen you out or to shortlist you, as the case may be. Now, in doing all of these things, you find that by supplying that kind of information, you are probably exposed to a level of discrimination or a level of something that could even cause harm or havoc against you. So this is what makes an information or a data to be sensitive. And in that context, your name may not be a sensitive personal data, but your ethnicity may be a sensitive personal data, and it actually is from the context of what I just explained. Even your sexual orientation is a sensitive personal data. Let me come to another thing again that I think should be able to you should be able to relate with as well. So many months back, I was searching for an health insurance for my parents, for instance, and in searching for that, because they are quite of age, and then majority of this health insurance, they want to be sure that are they taking on liability, or they are taking on something that they are sure they will make money from. So they would usually ask questions around the history, the health history, and many other things. Have you done surgery, allergies, and all of those things? And then there are things, or there are ailments that are most times applicable to the elderly ones. So they would ask questions around all of these things. Now, in asking those questions, what they then use it to do is to determine the premium to charge, or to even determine whether or not it's going to be a good bargain for them to enroll the person, as it were, as a subscriber to their health insurance. And because of this, it then leads to discrimination, because by giving that information, it would mean that you might be discriminated against in their decision. So I am using all these examples that I want to believe you are conversant with to guide you on the whole idea about sensitive personal data. And this is why the law then has its specific guidelines that relate to sensitive personal data, as different from the regular personal data that could be the regular information that all Tom, Dick, and Harry may have access to, which of course the law then protects, but then says that, look, when certain information can lead to havoc against somebody, or can lead to discrimination against that person, then there should be a level of protection that is uniquely prepared for this kind of situation. And so I'll give the examples of sensitive personal data, and then we can relate, or we can then give, I'll read them, and then we can then look through them, and you and I can agree on what makes them to be sensitive in the first place. So from the interpretation under the law the Nigeria Data Protection Act 2023. It says sensitive personal data includes genetic and biometric data. So for instance, you may have done biometric before where you supplied, you did fingerprint. For instance, are you aware that if you want to travel to some places, they would ask for security report, and then you need to generate your fingerprint report and all of that. Are you aware that this also could qualify as a sensitive personal data which you have certain rights on? Or for instance, you go to visa office where you have to do what is called biometrics. Are you aware that in getting those information, they are sensitive personal data about your person? So your genetic combination, and a lot of other things that might definitely be something that people can use to know who you are, and all of that. So your fingerprints, even your facial recognition, right? When you do biometrics, you see facial recognition is done. Sometimes it could even come with your voice print, where you are made to speak so that all this information can be put together. Now, these are sensitive things that can be used to identify you, and somehow too they can be used to discriminate against you. So somebody might see or hear your voice, for instance, and say, this person doesn't speak English as much as we want him or her to speak. And by reason of that, the decision is made to not allow the person to have visa. So these are very practical things that you see out there that happens, which is why the law is then trying to make provision that would help people to not be discriminated against. And this is why this kind of information is called sensitive personal data. How about information that has to do with your race? I gave an example the other time. You want to apply for work, and then the question then happens to be, what is your ethnicity? So you want to apply for work, and then that comes into play. So your race, your ethnic origin, they can be used to discriminate. Even supply of your religious beliefs and values, or your religious background, merely stating which religion you belong to may discriminate you in some places. I mean, if you want to work in a church office, for instance, and you are asked to supply, you are a Muslim, or maybe a traditional worshipper, and you are asked to supply the information about your religious belief, it becomes a sensitive data because it can be used to discriminate against you. So your health status, I gave the example of health insurance, your sex life, your political opinion or affiliation. Let's say that you are applying for an office, and then you are asked to mention, do you belong to a party? Are you a partisan or non-partisan? Do you belong to a party or not? This can be used to discriminate against you. So a whole lot. And how you know a personal, sensitive personal data is to ask, can this information, can this data be used to discriminate against me when it comes to decision making? Now, where it can be used to discriminate, then it is most likely what is called a sensitive personal data. So let's go to the next, which is where we will close, we'll call it a day. So how, or better still, now that we know that certain data are sensitive, in what situations does the law permit the use of that kind of information, that kind of data? There are at least 4 which I am going to be talking about in this session. The first is in a situation where the data subject, that means the person who is whose information it is, in a situation where there is a consent from that person, where the person has consented or has not withdrawn consent. So meaning that the person once consented and the consent is still validly existing. So in that kind of situation, then the person or the agency or the organization that is in custody of that data can definitely go on to use that data, to process that data, or to even control the use of the data once there is a consent to that, to having the data and to the use of that data. And then the next thing is in a situation where that data itself is going to be a subject of contract performance. So let's say, for instance, that that information is needed in the course of performing a contract in favor of the data subject, or where the data subject is the subject matter of that contract, or the person that has entered into that contract. So this is also another situation where you can find that sensitive personal data can, of course, be used. Then what of situations where it is actually to protect the data subject's interest? This definitely often happen, especially in medical line, for instance, or even where the government is trying to protect people who may be minority, who, without that kind of information disclosed, those people may be shut out from opportunities that would help them, to come to the equal level where other people are. So, for instance, a government or an institution that says we want to help people of this particular ethnic background just because they are disadvantaged by virtue of being from that ethnic background, then in that kind of situation, it might be essential, for instance, that these are done not just by way of contractual reason, but to protect the interest of the data subject. And so this is also a valid point where this can be done. And then the other would be where it is important to carry out a legitimate activity. And in this kind of situation, you might be looking at sometimes, religious organizations, NGOs, charitable entities, they could be extracting this kind of information as a way of carrying out legitimate activities for which they are registered. Don't forget, in the first place, the Companies and Allied Matters Act, which is the law that regulates including not-for-profit organizations, it says something about when you can operate a religious, an NGO. It says that it has to be for charitable purpose, education, scientific, and all of those things. And you find that all of these things, they relate directly or indirectly to sensitive personal data. So, where an NGO is registered for religious purpose, religious conversation itself falls under sensitive personal data. Where an entity is registered for scientific purpose will include health sometimes. It will include biometrics. It would include a whole lot of sensitive personal information, sensitive personal data about subjects. So you'd find that this particular clause is something that has been brought into place to ensure that, especially not-for-profit, they are able to carry out their objects, the very reason for which they are registered, so that they are able to do it without any disturbance, bearing in mind sensitive personal data. And I believe that this helps in a lot of ways. I will just pause a little, and in our subsequent edition I am going to be discussing, and then taking the example of church, I'm going to be discussing the whole idea of sensitive personal data, especially for not-for-profit organizations. And I'm going to be using the example of a church to drive home the point on the use of sensitive personal data when it comes to not-for-profit organizations. I hope that this session has come handy for you. My name remains Eyitayo Ogunyemi, and thank you for joining today's conversation. Do have for yourself a wonderful